My wife called me a failure in front of 12 investors and the man she wished I could become, and the strangest part was not the insult or the laughter or even the way she smiled after saying it, as if she had finally set down something heavy she had been carrying for years. The strangest part was how calm I felt. The room was warm, polished, and expensive, the kind of private event space in downtown Nashville where the windows ran from floor to ceiling and the city lights looked like they belonged to people who had already won. There were white roses on every table, bourbon in crystal glasses, and a scale model of Eden and oak sitting beneath a gold spotlight near the front of the room. My wife, Emily Carter, stood beside that model like a woman posing next to her future. She wore an ivory dress, simple enough to look tasteful and costly enough to remind everyone she had tasted. Her hair was pinned back. Her smile was bright. Her hand rested lightly on the shoulder of Brandon Whitmore, the man who had been calling himself her strategic partner for the last 6 months. I stood 10 feet away in a charcoal jacket she once told me made me look like a substitute teacher at a retirement seminar. Nobody had asked me to speak. Nobody had asked me anything at all until one of the investors, a tall man from Atlanta with silver glasses and a laugh that never reached his eyes, looked past Emily's presentation board and said, "So what role does your husband play in all this?" The room turned toward me with polite curiosity. Not respect. Curiosity. Like they had just noticed a coat left on the wrong chair. Emily looked at me, then back at them, and gave a small laugh. "Matthew," she said. "Matthew is proof that love does not pay rent." The laughter came softly at first, little polite taps against the air, then Brandon leaned back and added, "Every visionary needs a reminder of what failure looks like." That made them laugh harder. I did not move. My fingers stayed wrapped around a glass of ice water. One cube cracked inside it, a tiny sound, almost delicate, but I heard it clearer than all of them. Emily should have stopped there. A good wife would have. A decent stranger might have. But ambition has a way of needing witnesses, and humiliation tastes better to some people when served under warm lights. She tilted her head toward the model of Eden and Oak, her dream business, the boutique coffee and wellness studio she had talked about for years. White brick, oak shelves, brass fixtures, a yoga room in back, a little courtyard where women in expensive leggings could drink lavender lattes and talk about becoming their best selves. I knew every inch of that dream because I had listened to it over dinner, in bed, on road trips, during quiet Sunday mornings when we still spoke to each other like partners. I knew the square footage she wanted, the kind of espresso machine she admired, the neighborhood she believed would make the brand feel exclusive without seeming unreachable. I knew because I had remembered. That used to mean love. Now it made me invisible. Emily turned back to the room and said, "I spent years waiting for Matthew to build something. Eventually, I realized some men are not builders. They are furniture. You learn to live around them." A woman near the bar covered her mouth, not because she was offended, but because she did not want to be seen laughing too openly. Brandon did not bother hiding his smile. He lifted his glass like he was toasting my extinction. The city glowed behind him. Nashville traffic moved 30 floors below, red and white lights sliding along the streets like blood through glass veins. I looked at Emily, really looked at her, and for 1 second I saw the woman I married at 28, standing barefoot in our first apartment, eating cold pizza off paper plates because we could not afford a dining set yet. Back then, she told me she did not need rich. She needed real. Back then, I believed her. I set my glass down on the nearest table. Not hard, not loud, just enough that the conversation thinned. "Is that really what you think of me?" I asked. My voice surprised even me. Calm, low, steady enough to make the room uncomfortable. Emily's smile faded at the edges, but only for a second. Then she folded her arms and gave me the expression she used when she thought I was embarrassing her by existing too loudly. "Matthew," she said, "this is not the time." "It feels like exactly the time." A few eyes moved between us. Brandon's smile sharpened. Emily stepped closer, lowering her voice just enough to pretend she was being kind while making sure the first row could still hear. "I stopped thinking of you as a man years ago." There it was. Not a joke. Not a careless line after too much wine. A verdict. The kind signed in silence long before anyone reads it aloud. The room did not get louder after that. It got smaller. The air tightened. The lights seemed too bright on the white roses, Too bright on Emily's wedding ring. Too bright on the little wooden sign beside the model that read Eden and Oak. A place to begin again. I almost laughed at that. Begin again. She had no idea how close she was. My phone buzzed once inside my jacket pocket. I did not need to look, but I did. A message from Daniel Price, my attorney, filled the screen. Acquisition papers are ready. Closing confirmed for 9 a.m. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and looked at the woman who thought she was building a future without me. She was standing inside a dream she believed I could never afford to touch. What she did not know was that by breakfast, I would own the building, the debt, the vendor contracts, and the name she had printed on every invitation in that room. Matthew stepped back from the crowd, letting the polite laughter and the clinking of glasses fade into a low hum at the edges of the room. The spotlight on Eden and Oak dimmed slightly as the projector rotated to display her branding vision, the soft amber glow catching the brass lettering and highlighting every meticulously placed oak shelf in the model. He had watched this space transform from a blueprint on a napkin into a scale model, the dreams of his wife laid out in miniature like an exhibit for strangers to judge. Every smile she gave, every nod at Brandon Whitmore, every glance at the investors was cataloged in his memory with the precision of a man who had learned to see people and events like patterns in a ledger. He could feel the tension in the room shifting, subtle yet tangible, a quiet recognition among those who did not yet know that the man standing 10 feet away held a power they assumed he did not. He had always moved quietly, measured, observing rather than acting. His life had been a series of long hours, careful investments, and silent planning, each step designed to build stability without drawing attention. In those years, Emily had seen only the surface, the ordinary existence of a husband who drove a used pickup, wore plain shirts, and made the quiet sacrifices of home life. She had not noticed the growth of assets, the formation of holding companies, or the careful accumulation of influence and property that had allowed Matthew to prepare for this moment without a single person realizing it. He let his gaze drift from the model to the guests, noting the way Brandon leaned against the table, his confident smile masking a subtle uncertainty, the slight twitch of his hand as he sipped his glass of bourbon. The investors were engaged, nodding at Emily, hanging on her words, unaware that the foundations of the project they were about to fund were already under different ownership. Matthew breathed slowly, letting the silence around him anchor his thoughts, feeling the calm power that comes from preparation and foresight. He could recall the mornings spent calculating budgets, the evenings reviewing contracts and letters, the countless calls to attorneys and financial advisors that had gone unnoticed, each action a seed planted in the unseen. And now the harvest was close, though he would not reveal it yet. He stepped closer to the model, his shadow falling across the miniature oak tables and brass fixtures, and ran his finger lightly along the edge of the base, feeling the contours that Emily had once traced with her own hand in excitement. A pang of nostalgia ran through him, a brief reminder of the woman he had married, the person he had once believed in fully, who now stood under the warm lights wielding words like weapons against him. He did not respond immediately, did not speak, because power revealed too soon can spoil its effect. Instead, he allowed a few moments to pass, the investors shifting their weight, Brandon glancing his way, Emily adjusting her posture as if she sensed a change she could not name. Matthew's mind ran through the next hours, the sequences he had set into motion, and the orchestration of events that would unfold without interruption, each piece in place to allow the truth to surface naturally. There was a rhythm to it, a careful cadence, like reading the pulse of a city at dawn, knowing when each light would turn, when each door would open or close. He measured the room once more, letting his presence exist quietly at the edge, absorbing the energy, the ambitions, the dismissals, and storing them for the moment when the reveal would be complete. Outside the windows, the city lights reflected on the glass, tiny points of brilliance that reminded him of how much had been achieved in silence. Inside, the murmur of voices, the gentle hum of conversation, the undercurrent of excitement, all contrasted with the stillness he carried in his chest. It was a calm before a revelation, a pause before the shift. He allowed himself a subtle smile, not at them, not at her, but at the culmination of patience and preparation. Matthew knew that every detail mattered, that the timing of his next move would determine the impact, and he waited, observing, internalizing, until the space was ready to receive the truth that had been quietly growing under their feet for years. And in that quiet, he understood the power of silence, the way in which presence alone could convey authority, and how anticipation, carefully nurtured, could render a room completely still without a single word spoken. That night did not end with a confrontation. That was the first thing people never understand about men who have been pushed too far for too long. They expect shouting. They expect a glass thrown against a wall, a slammed door, a public scene that lets everyone point and say, "There, see, that is who he really is." I gave them none of that. I stood in that bright room above downtown Nashville while Emily finished her presentation, while Brandon nodded like a prince granting approval, while strangers praised the warmth of her vision and the courage it took to build something from nothing. From nothing. That phrase nearly made me smile. There are words that sound harmless until you know what they are covering. Nothing was the mortgage I carried alone when Emily left her marketing job to find her direction. Nothing was the 12-hour workdays I turned into down payments. Nothing was the retirement account I rebuilt after using part of it to clear her credit card debt before her mother could find out. Nothing was me sitting at the kitchen table at 2 a.m. with a calculator, a cold cup of coffee, and a yellow legal pad covered in numbers, trying to make her dreams fit inside our life without breaking either one. But Emily had learned to tell our story in a way that made her the sunrise and me the shadow. That was not new. It had happened slowly, then all at once, the way paint fades on a house until one day you finally notice the color is gone. 14 years earlier, we lived in a 700-square-foot apartment outside Franklin, Tennessee, with thin walls, uneven floors, and a refrigerator that hummed like an old truck. Emily used to dance barefoot in that kitchen while pasta boiled over and cheap candles tried to make the place feel romantic. I was 30 then, working logistics for a regional freight company, not glamorous, but steady. I handled routes, fuel costs, warehouse delays, drivers who called before sunrise because a trailer had a bad tire somewhere outside Knoxville. I like problems with edges. You could see them, measure them, solve them. Marriage, I thought, worked the same way. You showed up. You listened. You fixed what you could and held what you could not. Emily wanted more than steady. Even then, I knew that. She collected photos of cafes in Charleston, spa interiors in Scottsdale, little boutique hotels in Savannah with white walls and brass lamps. She would slide her phone across the table and say, "Imagine owning something like this." I imagined it because she did. I imagined it so clearly that I started doing more than dreaming. I took weekend consulting work. I learned commercial real estate while other men watched football. I read lease agreements at midnight. I saved vendor lists she forgot she had mentioned. I opened my first small investment account under Carter Meridian, a name I created at my desk while Emily slept in the next room, because I wanted something clean, something separate, something that could grow without being touched by our ordinary bills. At first, it was nothing impressive. A small stake in a warehouse property near Chattanooga, then a laundromat partnership outside Murfreesboro, then a failing strip mall bought low with two partners who wanted quick cash and did not understand patience. I understood patience. Patience is not weakness. Patience is a long hallway with a locked door at the end, and every quiet choice is another key in your pocket. Year by year, Carter Meridian grew in the background of our marriage. Emily saw the old pickup in the driveway. She saw the work shirts. She saw me choosing store-brand coffee and repairing the backyard fence myself instead of hiring someone. She did not see the quarterly statements. She did not ask why Daniel Price, an attorney from a firm downtown, sometimes called on Saturday mornings. She did not notice when I moved from managing freight routes to advising companies that owned the buildings freight moved through. She only saw what she had decided I was. That is the cruel comfort of contempt. Once someone puts you in a small box, they stop measuring you. They just keep stacking their assumptions on top. Around our 10th anniversary, Emily changed in a way I tried not to name. Her dreams became sharper, less shared. She stopped saying we and started saying my brand, my future, my investors. At dinner, she did not ask how my day was. She asked whether I had thought about updating my clothes, whether I understood how important image was, whether I could please not talk too much at networking events because I had a habit of making practical points when people wanted inspiration. Practical. That was the word she used when she meant embarrassing. I loved her through it longer than I should have, because memory is a dangerous thing. It keeps showing you the person someone used to be while the person in front of you keeps proving they are gone. So I stayed quiet. I paid attention. And when Emily first whispered the name Eden and Oak one rainy Sunday morning, I wrote it down after she left the room, not because I planned to control it, but because I planned to give it to her. That was the part she never saw coming. I was not her obstacle. I was the foundation under her feet. Emily's dream of Eden and Oak was more than a business plan. It was a blueprint of her ambition, a carefully constructed vision she had nurtured for years with every Pinterest board, magazine clipping, and coffee shop visit she could find. She had imagined the smell of freshly ground beans mixed with lavender and cedar, the sunlight streaming through oak-paneled windows onto polished concrete floors, and the soft hum of background music keeping every customer aware of their own presence without feeling crowded. The investors leaned in as she spoke, their eyes tracking her movements, noting the way she gestured toward the miniature model, the brass fixtures, the courtyard where she had planned to hang hanging planters in geometric patterns. Matthew watched quietly, his hands folded in front of him, noticing how every eye was on Emily, how Brandon nodded with the kind of approval people give to a performance they have been primed to expect. He recalled the nights spent at his desk, running numbers, calculating potential revenue streams, negotiating with vendors, and setting aside enough cash to acquire key properties if the opportunity ever arose. It had taken years of silent effort, moving in shadows, learning the patterns of property markets, studying local ordinances, and gaining insight into the way small businesses operated behind the scenes. Each action was deliberate, yet invisible to everyone who assumed he was nothing more than a supportive husband, a man happy to fade into the background. He could feel the subtle energy shift as Emily explained the brand strategy, her voice confident, her eyes bright with the excitement of someone who believed she was finally in control. Brandon, standing beside her, chuckled at a joke she had made about marketing, as if his amusement confirmed her worth. The room responded, a low wave of approval and quiet envy flowing around her like a current. Matthew allowed himself a brief, mental smile, imagining the look on their faces when the unseen foundation beneath her ambitions became visible. He had purchased the building where Eden and Oak would be located, secured all necessary licenses, and ensured every vendor and lease agreement was legally tied to Carter Meridian Group, the company he had quietly grown over the years. He had not made a move yet, but every step had been calculated, every variable considered. The investors were blissfully unaware, operating under the assumption that Emily held all the control, that Brandon's influence and her enthusiasm would suffice to secure their commitment. Matthew observed the scale model again, noticing the small details Emily had added herself, the seating arrangement she had decided would maximize social interaction, the space for yoga classes, the little cafe counter she had designed to allow for intimate customer experiences. It was meticulous, and he had preserved every element, every nuance, ensuring that when the moment came, he could allow her to feel the triumph of her vision while simultaneously revealing that he had quietly ensured its reality. He remembered the first time she had spoken about this idea to him, early on in their marriage, when they were younger, living in a modest apartment, juggling bills, work schedules, and dreams that seemed impossible. He had listened, and without comment, started taking steps that would allow her to achieve what she imagined without ever exposing his own capabilities. Emily's laughter rang through the room as she recounted a story of a customer experience she had envisioned, illustrating her knowledge of customer behavior and her understanding of brand aesthetics. The investors leaned forward, captivated, not realizing that the structure beneath every assumption she had made about her autonomy had already been secured. Matthew allowed himself to breathe slowly, absorbing the room, committing every face, every gesture, every pause to memory, knowing that the reveal he planned would be more powerful for the patience he had maintained. As she concluded her presentation, the applause started, polite at first, then growing louder as the investors expressed their admiration for her vision. Brandon lifted his glass again, smiling, as if to confirm the approval he believed he had helped secure. Matthew's eyes did not leave the model or Emily, and in that calm observation, he understood the weight of all the years spent quietly preparing. He thought of the nights spent negotiating, securing documents, ensuring that every contingency had been addressed, and how the smallest misstep could have undone everything he had built. The foundation he had laid was invisible, yet absolute. The applause echoed around him, filling the room, yet he remained still, a quiet presence that carried more weight than anyone in the room suspected. And in that stillness, he felt the satisfaction of knowing that when the time came, the reality he had constructed would be undeniable, a truth that would shift every assumption and redefine every expectation Emily had of him and of herself. By the time the applause faded, Emily looked alive in a way I had not seen at home in years. Not peaceful, not happy, alive. There is a difference. Peace sits quietly beside you at the breakfast table. Happiness finds you in small, ordinary things, a good cup of coffee, a warm porch, a familiar hand reaching for yours in the dark. What I saw in Emily that night was hunger wearing lipstick. She stood beneath those amber lights with Brandon at her side, breathing in approval like it was oxygen she had been denied by marriage itself. I knew that look. I had seen it across dinner tables, in hotel lobbies, at Chamber of Commerce events where she laughed too brightly at men who spoke in numbers and leaned too closely when they talked about scale, capital, and exit strategy. She wanted a life that looked expensive before it even became profitable. She wanted people to walk into Eden and Oak and feel slightly underdressed. She wanted women from Green Hills and Brentwood to take photographs of their lattes and talk about her as if she had created not a business, but a mood. I understood the dream better than she knew. That was what made the insult cut clean instead of loud. I was not offended because she had ambition. I had loved that part of her once. I was offended because she had started using ambition as a ladder, and my face had become the first rung she wanted to step on. Brandon moved through the room like a man who believed confidence was the same thing as competence. He shook hands with investors, touched elbows, laughed with his head slightly tilted back, making sure everyone saw his teeth and his watch. He wore a navy suit that looked tailored by someone who charged more than most people paid for rent, and he had the kind of voice that made weak ideas sound expensive. I had met him 6 months earlier at a private business mixer Emily insisted I attend, then spent the entire drive warning me not to over-explain logistics to anyone important. Brandon introduced himself as a growth strategist. I have learned to distrust titles that require a second sentence. He spoke about expansion, positioning, acquisition pathways, and premium customer psychology. But when I asked him what Eden and Oak's break-even point would be after payroll, insurance, utilities, inventory, leasehold improvements, and tax obligations, he blinked twice and said, "That is the kind of granular thinking we can outsource." Emily laughed then, too. Small laugh. Careful laugh. The kind that tells a man he has been demoted in public. After that night, Brandon became a regular name in our house. Brandon thinks. Brandon says. Brandon knows a guy. Brandon has access to capital. The name arrived in conversations before I did. I would come home from meetings in Memphis or Louisville, set my keys on the counter, and find Emily at the island with her laptop open, mood boards spread around her like evidence. She would talk fast, excited, almost breathless, until I asked a practical question. Then the air would change. Her shoulders would tighten. Her eyes would cool. "Matthew, can you please just be supportive for once?" Supportive. Another word that had been hollowed out and turned into a leash. What she wanted was not support. She wanted applause without inspection. She wanted a husband who smiled in the corner while another man explained the future I had quietly financed in pieces. At first, I tried to tell myself I was being unfair. Marriage makes a man negotiate with his own instincts. You do not want to seem jealous. You do not want to seem small. You do not want to become the bitter husband in the doorway, measuring every conversation like a threat. So I watched, not suspiciously, carefully. There is a difference. I noticed how Brandon's calls came after 9 o'clock at night and were always urgent. I noticed how Emily stepped into the laundry room to take them, even when the house was quiet. I noticed how her language changed after every meeting with him. She stopped saying our savings. She started saying my leverage. She stopped saying when we open. She started saying when I launch. One evening, about 3 weeks before the investor event, I came home early because a meeting in Chattanooga had ended before lunch. Rain followed me up the driveway, soft and steady, tapping against the gutters. I stepped inside and heard Emily's voice from the dining room. low and sharp in a way she never used with clients. Her laptop was open. Brandon was on speaker. I did not move. Not because I wanted to spy on my wife, but because some sentences reach you before your conscience does. Brandon said, "Once the funding lands, you need to separate the brand from Matthew completely. Investors do not like unclear domestic entanglements." Emily answered so quickly it sounded rehearsed. "I know. I just need him to stay quiet until the check's clear." The rain kept tapping. My hand stayed on the doorknob. Brandon chuckled and said, "You have carried dead weight long enough." Then Emily said the part that changed everything. "After Eden and Oak is funded, I will file. I will tell everyone I built it while he doubted me." I remember looking down at my boots on the mat, mud drying along the edges, water gathering in small dark spots beneath them. Strange what the mind chooses to save. Not the heartbreak first. The floor, the rain, the smell of wet leather. I did not walk in. I did not demand an explanation. I backed out of the house as quietly as I had entered, sat in my truck for 11 minutes, and let the windshield blur the world into gray. Then I called Daniel Price and told him to move forward with the acquisition. Not because I wanted to crush her dream, because I had finally understood she was planning to use that dream to erase me. The decision did not feel powerful at first. It felt cold. Not the clean kind of cold that clears your head on a winter morning, but the kind that settles in your chest when you finally stop making excuses for someone. I sat in my truck outside our house that rainy afternoon with one hand on the steering wheel and the other holding my phone, listening to Daniel Price breathe once before he answered. Daniel was not the dramatic type. Good attorneys rarely are. He had guided Carter Meridian through enough acquisitions to know that panic makes people sloppy, and sloppiness is expensive. When I told him to move forward, he did not ask whether I was sure. He only said, "Then we do this clean." Clean. That word stayed with me. Not cruel. Not loud. Not emotional. Clean meant documents, timing, signatures, filings, escrow, vendor notices, and every line checked twice before anyone even smelled smoke. I spent the next 3 weeks living beside Emily like a man walking through a house where the floorboards had already been removed, smiling at breakfast, answering ordinary questions, taking out the trash on Tuesday nights, and sleeping with my back turned because looking at her felt too much like reading a letter I already knew would end badly. She was busy preparing for the investor event. She barely noticed the distance. Or maybe she noticed and liked it. Silence gave her room to rehearse her new life. On the kitchen island, Eden and Oak grew larger every day. Fabric samples, menu mock-ups, cream-colored business cards, a guest list printed on heavy paper. She circled names with a gold pen and spoke them like prayers. The Atlanta investor, the Nashville real estate couple, the wellness influencer from Belmead. Brandon Whitmore, of course, appeared beside nearly every decision now, wrapped around her plans like ivy on brick. He suggested the lighting. He pushed for a higher membership tier. He wanted a founder wall near the entrance with Emily's photograph in black and white, arms folded, eyes lifted towards something only visionaries could see. I said, "Very little." That was hard for her to interpret because for years she had mistaken my quiet for defeat. Quiet is useful that way. People pour their assumptions into it and call the shape truth. While Emily rehearsed her speech in front of the hallway mirror, I was working through Daniel. Carter Meridian acquired the building first, a 2-story brick property on a corner lot 12 minutes from downtown, close enough to feel central, but far enough to sell calm as luxury. The seller was a retired dentist who owned 3 commercial properties and wanted out before his knees gave out completely. Emily thought she was negotiating a lease through Brandon's contact. She did not know Brandon's contact had missed 2 tax payments and quietly sold his position to a broker tied to us. Then came the vendor contracts. The custom oak shelving company outside Asheville. The espresso equipment supplier in Seattle. The flooring crew in Hendersonville. The branding consultant who had registered several concept variations but never finalized the primary mark. Daniel's team found every loose thread and tied it to us. Not illegally, not aggressively, just carefully. That is the part people misunderstand about power. Most of the time, it does not kick down a door. It waits beside the door with the key. Each evening, Daniel sent updates in language that sounded small until you understood what it meant. Letter of intent accepted. Assignment provision confirmed. Trademark conflict resolved. Equipment financing transferable. Closing scheduled. I saved every message, not out of pride, but out of discipline. A paper trail beats memory. Memory gets emotional. Paper sits there under fluorescent light and tells the same story every time. The night before the event, Emily came into the bedroom while I was folding a dress shirt on the bed. She looked beautiful in that careful way people look when they have spent the whole day imagining being admired. She watched me for a moment, then said, "Tomorrow matters, Matthew. Please do not make it awkward." I looked up at her. 14 years of marriage stood between us, thin as a curtain. "Awkward how?" I asked. She sighed like I had already disappointed her by needing clarification. "Do not ask detailed questions. Do not challenge Brandon. Do not start talking about freight or buildings or whatever it is you think investors care about. Just be supportive." I smoothed the sleeve of the shirt. One slow pass, then another. "And what does supportive look like to you?" She did not hesitate. "Stand there. Smile. Let me have this." There it was again. Let me. As if I had been the locked door. As if the years of paid bills, quiet planning, late nights, and swallowed pride had been obstacles instead of scaffolding. I nodded once because sometimes a nod is not agreement. Sometimes it is a receipt. She seemed relieved and left the room. I sat on the edge of the bed after she closed the door, listening to her footsteps fade down the hall, and I thought about the version of me who once wanted to surprise her with keys to Eden and Oak, maybe over dinner, maybe on our 15th anniversary, maybe with that foolish hope men keep alive longer than they should. That version of me was tired. Not gone exactly, just tired enough to step aside. The next morning, before sunrise, I drove to Daniel's office on West End Avenue and signed the final documents with a black pen that felt heavier than it looked. Daniel slid the closing folder toward me and said, "As of 9 o'clock, Carter Meridian controls the project." I looked through the window at Nashville waking up under a pale gray sky. I did not feel victorious. I felt awake. And by nightfall, everyone in that room would be, too. The investor event should have been the end of my patience, but it became the beginning of their education. After Emily told that room she had stopped thinking of me as a man, after Brandon lifted his glass like my humiliation came with a champagne pairing, I did exactly what she had asked me to do the night before. I stood there. I smiled. I let her have it. That is the thing about certain promises. People hear the words they want and miss the weight underneath them. Emily turned back to her guests, cheeks slightly flushed, eyes bright with victory, and continued speaking as if she had only cleared a small inconvenience from the floor. She described Eden and Oak as a sanctuary for reinvention, a place where people could walk in carrying the weight of ordinary life and leave feeling new. The room loved that line. Of course they did. Reinvention sounds noble when nobody asks who got erased to make room for it. Brandon moved beside her like he belonged in every photograph, nodding at her phrases, touching the corner of the model, pointing to the cafe bar as if he had built it with his own hands instead of borrowed confidence and other people's vendor lists. I watched him sell charm the way street vendors sell umbrellas during rain, quick, bright, and priced for desperation. When Emily finished, the applause came again, stronger now, warmed by bourbon and ambition. Someone called her inspiring. Someone else said the concept had national potential. Brandon accepted the praise as if it had been addressed to him. Then he turned toward me. I saw it coming before he opened his mouth. Men like Brandon cannot leave a quiet man alone. They mistake restraint for an invitation. "Matthew," he said, loud enough for the nearest investors to hear, "you have been awfully quiet tonight." His tone wore friendliness like a cheap coat. Emily glanced at him, then at me, and I saw a flicker of warning in her eyes, not because she cared how I felt, but because she feared I might step outside the role she had assigned me. The room softened into silence again. Not complete silence. There were still glasses settling on tables, a bartender scooping ice, low music drifting through hidden speakers. But the attention shifted, clean and deliberate, like a spotlight turning. Brandon smiled and said, "Tell us, what do you think of all this? Pretty impressive, right?" Watching Emily finally build something real. A few people chuckled. I looked at the model before I looked at him. "It is impressive," I said. That seemed to disappoint him. He wanted resistance. Resistance gives a bully shape. Calm leaves him holding air. Brandon tilted his head. "You know, I have to respect a woman who dreams beyond the limitations of her environment." He paused, letting the sentence sharpen. "Some people rise. Some people get comfortable being average. Emily's lips parted slightly, but she did not stop him. That silence told me more than her words ever could. It was not that she failed to defend me. It was that she was waiting to see whether the room agreed. I felt something old inside me close, not with anger, but with the quiet click of a final lock. The Atlanta investor with silver glasses gave an awkward laugh, the kind people use when they are not sure whether cruelty is part of the entertainment. Brandon stepped closer, lowering his glass to his side. No offense, Matthew. I just mean Emily has outgrown a lot. Including me? I asked. The question landed flat and steady. Emily inhaled through her nose. Brandon smiled wider. Your words, not mine. No, I said. Those were yours. I am just making sure the room heard them. That was the first time his smile slipped. Not much. Just enough. A hairline crack in polished stone. Emily walked toward me then, heels clicking softly on the hardwood floor. Matthew, please do not do this. Do what? Make this about you. I almost admired the sentence. There are people who can cut you in public, then accuse you of bleeding too loudly. I looked at her, and for a second the room disappeared. I saw her years ago in that little apartment outside Franklin, wearing one of my old sweatshirts, sketching cafe layouts on the back of grocery receipts. I saw the woman who used to ask me if I thought oak shelves felt warmer than painted ones. I saw the woman who once believed I was steady, not small. Then the memory folded itself and vanished. In front of me stood the woman who had told a room full of strangers that I was furniture. Emily, I said, softly enough that people leaned in. I did not make this about me. Her eyes narrowed. Then stop acting hurt. That one almost got through. Not because it was sharp, because it was familiar. For years, she had treated my pain like bad manners. If I was quiet, I was distant. If I spoke, I was dramatic. If I helped, I was interfering. If I stepped back, I was unsupportive. That is how a person trains you to live smaller inside your own marriage. They move every boundary, then call you difficult for looking lost. I nodded. Once. You are right, I said. Tonight should stay focused on Eden and Oak. Relief flashed across her face. Brandon gave a small laugh, thinking I had folded. I reached into my jacket pocket, felt the edge of my phone, and ignored it. Not yet. Timing matters. I turned toward the guests and lifted my water glass, not in surrender, but in farewell to the version of the room that still believed it understood the story. To Emily, I said. To her dream. To everyone who helped her believe she could build it. Glasses rose slowly around the room. Emily held hers with a cautious smile. Brandon lifted his higher than anyone. I let the toast hang there for one clean breath. Then I looked at my wife and said, Tomorrow morning, you will understand what I helped build. The room went still again, but this time the stillness had a different shape. It had questions in it. Emily's smile tightened. What is that supposed to mean? I set the glass down. It means I kept my promise. I stood here. I smiled. I let you have this. I reached for my coat from the back of a chair, folded it over my arm, and looked once more at the little sign beside the model, the one that said a place to begin again. Now enjoy the rest of your night. Brandon laughed, but it came out thin. Running away already? I looked at him, and this time I did smile. Not big, not cruel, just enough for him to feel the temperature change. No, Brandon. I am done standing in a room I already own. Nobody spoke. Not Emily. Not Brandon. Not the investors who suddenly looked less amused and more awake. I walked to the elevator without raising my voice, without looking back, without giving them the scene they had earned. As the door slid closed, I saw Emily still standing beside her perfect little model, her face caught between confusion and fear. The last thing I heard before the elevator dropped was Brandon asking, What does he mean, own? And for the first time all night, nobody laughed. The elevator doors closed on a room full of questions, and for the first time that night, I was alone with the sound of my own breathing. 30 floors down does not take long, but it gave me enough. Time to feel the weight of what had happened settle into place. I did not feel proud of the sentence I had left behind. I did not feel ashamed of it either. Some truths arrive gently, and some walk into a room wearing boots. Mine had finally stepped inside. The lobby was nearly empty when I crossed it, just a security guard behind a marble desk, a young couple waiting for a ride, and the soft hiss of rain against the revolving doors. Nashville looked blurred beyond the glass. The city lights stretched into gold and red lines across wet pavement. I paused under the awning, buttoned my coat, and let the cool air hit my face. My phone began vibrating before I reached the curb. Emily first, then Brandon, then Emily again. I watched her name appear on the screen like a warning light on a dashboard I had ignored for too long. I did not answer. There are conversations that belong before disrespect, and conversations that only become traps after it. I had no interest in stepping into another trap. Daniel Price called 2 minutes later. I answered that one. "You left," he said. Not a question. Daniel always had a way of making 3 words sound like a status report. "I did." "Did you disclose anything specific?" "Only enough." A pause. Papers shifted on his end. "Good. We keep the formal reveal for tomorrow." I looked across the street at the reflection of the building in a rain puddle. The whole tower shimmered there, broken by ripples, tall and expensive and temporary. "She is going to call you," I said. "I know. Brandon will probably try to sound important. They usually do." That almost made me laugh. "Almost." Daniel continued. "The meeting is set for 9:30 in the building conference room. Seller representatives, vendor counsel, trademark consultant, and Ms. Carter's investment group were already notified of a required ownership clarification before any funding documents can proceed." "Does Emily know Carter Meridian is involved?" "Not yet. The notices list the managing entity, not the principal." Standard procedure. Standard procedure. Another quiet phrase with teeth. I thanked him and ended the call. Across town, Emily was probably staring at the elevator. Doors I had walked through, trying to decide whether I was bluffing, confused, or finally becoming inconvenient in a way she could not manage with a look. I knew her mind well enough to hear it working. She would tell herself I had misunderstood something. She would ask Brandon. Brandon would puff himself up and say he would handle it. Then he would make calls. Those calls would not comfort him. I drove home through rain that turned the windshield into moving glass. The house was dark when I arrived. Except for the kitchen light Emily always forgot to turn off when she left in a hurry. I stood there for a moment after stepping inside, listening to the quiet. 14 years of marriage leave echoes in a house. The spot by the door where she used to kick off her shoes. The framed photograph from our trip to Charleston, where she fell in love with a cafe that smelled like cinnamon and old wood. The small crack in the hallway wall from when we moved in a bookcase together and laughed until we gave up and ordered pizza on the floor. A house remembers the good parts even when the people inside it stop honoring them. I went upstairs, took off my jacket, and placed it over the back of a chair. My phone kept lighting up on the dresser. Emily's messages came in waves. "What did you mean? Matthew, answer me. This is not funny. Do not embarrass me tomorrow." Then Brandon's name appeared with a message so perfectly him I could almost hear the smirk. Big emotions can damage real opportunities. Let us be adults. I set the phone face down. The room got quieter. Not peaceful, just quieter. I slept less than 3 hours, and by 6:15 in the morning, I was already awake, standing at the kitchen counter with black coffee and the kind of stillness that follows a final decision. Emily never came home. That told me what I needed to know. At 8:45, I drove to the Eden and Oak property, the actual building this time, not the little model from the party. It sat on a corner lot with wet brick walls, tall front windows, and a faded sign from the old stationery shop that used to occupy the space. The morning sky was pale gray, the kind of Tennessee winter morning that makes every sound feel sharper. Daniel was already there in a dark overcoat, holding a leather folder. He nodded once. "Ready?" I looked at the building Emily thought would free her from me. Yes. Inside, the conference room smelled like new paint and old wood. The seller's attorney sat at one end of the table. 2 vendor representatives whispered over coffee. The trademark consultant scrolled through a tablet. At 9:29, Emily walked in wearing a cream blazer and a smile built for survival. Brandon followed half a step behind her, phone in hand, jaw tight. She froze when she saw me seated beside Daniel. Not surprised exactly. More like a person watching a locked door open from the inside. "Matthew," she said carefully, "what are you doing here?" I looked at Daniel, then back at her. "Keeping the meeting on schedule." Brandon scoffed. "This is a business matter." Daniel opened his folder. "Correct, Mr. Whitmore. That is why Mr. Carter is present." Emily glanced at the folder, then at the others around the table. "Why would Matthew be present?" Daniel slid the first document across the polished wood. The room seemed to lean toward it. "Because as of yesterday morning, Carter Meridian Group owns this building, controls the primary vendor assignments, and holds the relevant brand registrations pending final use confirmation. Emily did not touch the paper. Her eyes moved over the words without accepting them. Brandon reached for it instead, then stopped when Daniel placed a second document beside the first. And for clarity, Daniel said, Matthew Carter is the sole managing partner. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of things breaking quietly. Emily stared at the document as if the words might rearrange themselves into something kinder if she waited long enough. They did not. Carter Meridian Group sat at the top of the page in clean black letters, followed by signatures, dates, parcel numbers, assignment clauses, and the quiet legal language that turns dreams into property. Her hand hovered above the paper but never touched it. Brandon touched it for her. He snatched the first page with the confidence of a man, used to performing authority in rooms where nobody checks the wiring. His eyes moved quickly at first, then slower, then stopped. That was the moment I saw understanding reach him before pride could block the door. His jaw tightened. The color in his face changed by one careful shade. Emily noticed. So did everyone else. This has to be some kind of mistake, Brandon said. Daniel Price did not lean forward. He did not raise his voice. He only adjusted his glasses and said, It is not. The seller's attorney, a woman named Marlene Shaw with silver hair and the calm expression of someone who had billed people through worse mornings, folded her hands on the table. The sale closed yesterday at 9 o'clock in the morning. The transfer was properly recorded. All notices were sent according to the contract terms. Emily finally looked at me. Not at Daniel. Not at Brandon. Me. The way she looked at me was almost worse than the things she had said the night before, because for the first time in years, she was not looking through me. She was searching me, measuring me, trying to find the man she had misplaced inside the one sitting across from her. You bought the building, she said. Her voice was soft, not gentle, just drained. Yes. Why would you do that? I let the question sit there for a second. It deserved the room. Because you needed it. Her mouth parted slightly. Brandon gave a sharp laugh. That is absurd. Emily had the lease path secured. Daniel opened another folder. The prior lease path was contingent on ownership approval. Ownership changed. The contingency did not survive the sale. Brandon looked down again, flipping pages harder than necessary. Paper can take a lot of punishment without changing what it says. Fine, he said. A building is just a building. We can relocate. The espresso supplier cleared his throat at the far end of the table. Actually, the custom equipment order was assigned to Carter Meridian under the financing transfer. Brandon turned toward him. You cannot be serious. The supplier raised both hands slightly. We follow the paperwork. The shelving representative spoke next, uncomfortable but firm. Same with the millwork. Contract. The oak installations, the bar structure, the retail wall, all tied to the project entity listed in the assignment. The trademark consultant tapped her tablet. And the name usage has a pending conflict resolution controlled by Carter Meridian as of last week. No public rollout can proceed without written approval. One by one, the invisible beams under Emily's dream became visible. The room was not collapsing. That would have been too loud. It was being lit from underneath, showing everyone where the Real Foundation had been the whole time. Emily sat down slowly, not because anyone told her to, but because standing suddenly seemed like more work than her body could afford. Brandon stayed on his feet. Men like him often do. They believe height can substitute for leverage. This is a hostile move, he said. I looked at him. No, this is ownership. He pointed at me with two fingers wrapped around the document, trying to make the gesture look casual and failing. You are doing this because you are emotional. I am doing this because I read contracts. That landed harder than I expected. Marlene Shaw looked down at her notes to hide the smallest smile. Emily noticed that too. Her face tightened, and for a second I saw anger try to rescue her from embarrassment. You let me stand in that room last night, she said. You let me present. I did. You let me think I was building this. I leaned back slowly. The chair gave a quiet creak beneath me. Emily, you were building the presentation. I was building the structure. Her eyes glistened, but she did not cry. Not yet. She looked too stunned for tears, like a person who had walked confidently onto a stage and only now realized the audience had been reading a different script. Brandon leaned over the table. Emily, do not engage with this. We can find another property, another name, another vendor group. Investors care about the founder, not some paperwork stunt. Daniel slid a final packet forward. Before you make promises to Ms. Carter, Mr. Whitmore, you should review this. Brandon did not take it. What is that? Your projections. The room shifted again. Not dramatically, just enough that every chair seemed to become aware of its occupant. Daniel continued. Carter Meridian conducted due diligence after acquiring the related project interests. Several financial assumptions in the investor materials appear inconsistent with vendor quotes, operating costs, and market comparables. Brandon's face hardened. Emily turned to him. What is he talking about? Brandon waved a hand. Legal intimidation. Ignore it. Daniel opened the packet himself. The membership revenue forecast assumes 400 founding members within the first 60 days at $249 per month. The market study you cited references a different county, a different income bracket, and a fitness chain with 12 existing locations. The projected labor costs exclude front desk coverage, payroll taxes, cleaning services, and weekend staffing. The build-out estimate is short by approximately $180,000. The numbers settled over the table like dust after a shelf has been pulled away from a wall. Emily looked at Brandon again, and this time her expression changed. Not toward me, toward him. A small crack opened in the story she had been telling herself. Brandon saw it and rushed to fill it. Every startup has aggressive projections. Aggressive is one word, Daniel said. Misleading is another. I watched Emily absorb that. Her dream business, the one she thought Brandon had elevated beyond my ordinary reach, had been padded, polished, and dressed for applause. He had not been saving her from my limitations. He had been using her ambition as a showroom. Emily whispered, Brandon, did you know the build-out estimate was wrong? He did not answer fast enough. That was all the answer she needed. The silence moved from him to her, then from her to me. I did not enjoy it. That surprised me. I had imagined this moment in fragments during sleepless nights, imagined some sharp satisfaction when Brandon finally stood exposed and Emily finally understood. But sitting there, watching humiliation return to the person who had handed it to me, I felt no victory, only the heavy sadness of seeing a beautiful dream dragged through cheap hands. Emily looked down at the Eden and Oak folder in front of her, the cream paper, the gold logo, the careful promise of beginning again. So what happens now? She asked. For the first time that morning, her voice carried no performance. I folded my hands on the table. Now we tell the truth about what this business is, what it costs, who controls it, and who is qualified to stand behind it. Brandon scoffed. And I suppose that is you? I looked at him long enough for his confidence to start looking borrowed. No, Brandon. That is the part you still do not understand. Emily raised her eyes. The room waited. I did not come here to stand behind your lie, I said. I came here to decide whether her dream is still worth saving after both of you tried to build it on top of me.